Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to your CCA UNITE event. It's a wonderful honor to be part of this. My name is Beata. I'm a molecular biologist working at the UC San Diego and the Ludwig Institute for Cancer Research. And in the lab, I study how human cells divide with the aim to improve the way we treat cancer. And along my academic career, I also create science art and fashion to share the beauty of biology with the world, because I love getting students and creative people excited about science. And I'm really looking forward to sharing my story with you all today. I love the theme of your event, and I would love to tell you about how two seemingly different disciplines, science and art, can actually act in harmony. So I talk about what it's like to be a scientist and artist, about how I got into molecular biology, and how I discovered that art is a great way to communicate science. And I hope that I can even inspire you to try some creative adventures as well. So I was born in a very small village in Poland. It was in the middle of nowhere with no scientists around, mostly farms. But I did grow up with a little bit of both worlds because my dad is an engineer and my mom an artist. So I had a very analytical and also a very visual approach. And I really liked both of them. But when I was younger, it never even crossed my mind that I could combine science and art. So in school, I used to make drawings for my friends, but I never thought about art as my main career path. And I didn't really know much about science either. I didn't know what a lab looked like from the inside or how research works, but I was really fascinated and intrigued by the concept of how we are made of cells, how DNA is our genetic material, and all of the fascinating things that make life possible. And because I thought I had to choose between my two passions, I decided to study molecular biology. I really had no idea what to expect, but during my undergrad, I started doing a lot of microscopy and I fell in love with cell division. So I was using these fancy microscopes that can take pictures of these tiny cells. And this picture on the slide shows real human cells that are dividing. And I was so fascinated by the beauty and about how much we still don't understand about cell division. And I still remember the moment when I saw my first dividing cell. It was during one of my very early internships, and I was immediately fascinated by the beauty. You see all of those gorgeous colorful structures, and this is a human cell that is going through all the different stages of cell division. So the purple is the DNA that holds our genetic material, and the green structures are the microtubules, which are important for many processes in the cell, including cell division. And maybe some of you will recognize the mitotic spindle in metaphase and then anaphase, where the chromosomes are being pulled apart so that each new daughter cell can receive the correct set of DNA. But there is more to these structures than what we can see under the microscope. So here's a drawing I added to highlight all of the structures that are too small to capture with a light microscope. And you can see how much is going on there. And I realized that what I knew about cell division going into science was really just an overview. But in reality, every single step in cell division has to be highly coordinated and is extremely complex. So to give you an example, I spent 5 whole years studying the final step in cell division, which happens right after this. And it's just a moment where cells cut the connection between each other so that they can separate. And even now, 10 years later, the research on this topic is far from being complete. And to me, it's just so amazing knowing that cell division is not only fascinating on an intellectual level, but it's happening in our bodies all of the time and all life depends on it. And one of the reasons why research on cell division is so important is because it helps us understand the biology of cancer cells. Because cancer means that cell division gets out of control and cells start dividing too much, which then causes harm. So understanding this process can lead to better treatments in the future. So after doing my PhD in Austria, I moved to San Diego for my postdoctoral research. And here is me culturing my cells in these petri dishes. And now I study how different types of cells in our bodies divide. And this can improve the way we treat cancer, because if we can find drugs that target only certain types of cells that are affected by the cancer without harming the healthy cells, then we can make cancer therapy more effective and less harmful. In the lab, I really love what I do because I get to use my creativity to design experiments and to think outside the box. And it actually has a lot of parallels with art. And having the chance to see something under the microscope that nobody has ever seen before is just incredibly exciting. And even though working in the lab can sometimes be quite challenging, those are the moments that are just so rewarding, and it's what keeps me going to make more discoveries in the future and make the world a better place. But my journey towards combining science and art was less straightforward. So when I was in school deciding what to study, I wasn't sure what to do. And the two other things that I was seriously considering besides science were art and fashion, because I always loved making drawings, I loved sewing and crafting. I thought I had to pick between my passions because at the time I didn't know anyone else who was doing this. And many of us probably grew up hearing similar things, that science and art have very little in common and that either you can be a scientist or an artist. But historically speaking, this was quite the opposite. Drawings were crucial to record and communicate scientific findings, and scientists also had to be artists because of that. For example, Leonardo da Vinci, he brilliantly combined art and science and engineering. And even though he may be best known for his artistic masterpieces, he was also an amazing scientist and engineer. And all of the skills that he developed as an artist, like his perception and his attention to detail, enabled him to draw these really accurate representations of biology. Another great example are the drawings that illustrate Darwin's ideas on evolution. And today, of course, we're all familiar with this concept, but it wasn't always like this. And many non-scientists back then were skeptical and they weren't convinced by such an unfamiliar concept. And it was actually science art that helped convince the public about this new idea of life. And finally, here are some beautiful drawings of cells created by Walter Fleming. And he actually drew what he saw under the microscope. So remember, there were no cameras and no computers, and it's actually amazingly accurate. So all of these people were both scientists and artists, and their work made a really big impact on how people think about science and the world we live in. And this is still true today, but nowadays we have so many more ways of communicating science beyond drawings. There's new types of media and a lot of new careers in science communication. So after studying molecular biology, I fully focused on working in the lab for many years, and I never really had a chance to make time for creative projects. But then, about halfway through my PhD, I had the opportunity to create a drawing about my research. And at the time, I was working on this final step of cell division, where the last connection between the cells is cut. And this is what I drew. So it's two cells literally using scissors to cut each other apart. And so I started using this drawing in my scientific presentations, and I realized something amazing. I noticed that people from my institute and conferences, they would remember my research even years after my presentations, because they remember the drawing and together with it, the science. And this is the first time I realized that science art could be an amazing tool to present and communicate my research. So this inspired me to continue experimenting. And I wanted to find more creative ways to show my findings as they were emerging during my PhD. So this is the same drawing overlaid with real microscopy images. The blue is the DNA and the purple structures are the microtubules. And so now this drawing, of course, is not literally accurate because cells can't cut their bridge with scissors. Instead, the cells use spirals that are made of proteins, and they constrict the tube, so they pinch it until the cells can separate. So this is the bridge that we saw before, but now it's vertical. So there's one cell on the top and the other cell is on the bottom. So they first wrap around the bridge and then get smaller and smaller until the bridge can split between the cells. So I thought a lot about how to portray this concept. And when I participated in an art competition at our institute, I decided to try another experiment. And I made a dress that explains this process. So you see it has a rope that is wrapped around a corset, and that represents the constriction of the bridge between the dividing cells. And it wasn't the most comfortable dress, but it really got the point across really well. So I wore this dress at the Vienna Science Ball. That's a big tradition in Austria. You have these fancy gatherings every year, and this particular one is science themed, and it brings together scientists and people who are interested in science. And I couldn't believe how many people asked me about the meaning of this dress and how easy it was to get people curious about my research just because I was wearing this very strange dress. But of course, things get more complicated. These spirals are actually not continuous fibers like a rope, but they are made of many small building blocks that bind to each other and form these large structures. So in my PhD research, I looked at the dynamics of this structure, and we found something very surprising. We found that these building blocks are not like bricks that are stably built into a structure, but they are being constantly exchanged inside of the spirals. So they are being constantly taken out and replaced. And this was a figure from my actual research paper, and you can see how the building blocks are forming these spirals and how they are being exchanged by these purple enzymes. But I always found it quite hard to wrap my hand around it and how to best present it. So to make it easier to explain, I made an analogy to think of the building blocks as Lego pieces. And the Lego people here are constantly removing and replacing those pieces within the structure. So as I was experimenting with these artistic approaches, I learned that even if something is getting more and more complex, there's always a way to make it intuitive by connecting it with something that we are all familiar with. So no matter how little you know about science and biology, everybody understands the concept of Lego pieces, for example. And I found that this works really well with other types of data too. So this image is a microscopy image of a human cell that is dividing. So the blue I get is the DNA. The green is the mitotic spindle, which pulls apart the chromosomes. So if you're familiar with these images, you can kind of tell what's going on, but it's very blurry because the cells are extremely tiny, and even the best microscopes have these limitations. So I created this drawing to show exactly the same process. Even if you don't know anything about what the drawing is about, you immediately get the idea that something is being pulled apart. Maybe you would recognize the chromosomes here, and that the ropes here form the shape of mitotic spindle, which then pulls the chromosomes apart. So this drawing So these types of drawings made it much easier to visualize the concept of cell division. And this is, of course, not limited to microscopy images. Here, for example, is a real protein structure of the ribosome. The ribosome is a big machine that can produce proteins that form most of the building blocks in the cell. And this is a tRNA, which is a small piece of RNA that gets incorporated into this structure to make it more stable. So I had the idea to make the analogy to crocheting, because to me, the RNA kind of looks like a string that is woven into the structure. And so I decided to represent the RNA as yarn that is crocheted into the structure. And then you have the different colors here representing the different structures, like the RNA and the protein. So this is, again, real scientific data fused with a drawing. So after making a few of these drawings, some friends of mine in the lab started asking me to make drawings for their research. And then people who I didn't know started asking me. And before I knew it, I was making these drawings for conferences and labs all over the world. And I would have never dreamt that I would be able to do this when I started studying science. And around that time, I also started creating science fashion because I wanted to share the beauty of science with the world. The idea came from spending many, many hours in a dark microscope room. And I thought it was such a pity that all of these gorgeous structures and images that we see under the microscope every day, they very rarely get shared outside of the lab with the world. So I had the idea to print these images on fabric and wear them outside of the lab. And I couldn't believe how many people became curious about science. And I realized that I can use the beauty of biology to connect with people on a different level. So especially people who might be intimidated by complicated graphs or figures, they get curious and excited about biology when it's presented in a visual way. So I found that science doesn't have to be presented as hard and intimidating. If you love things like art and fashion, and you also have a passion for science, it doesn't mean that you have to pick between the two. You can love art and creativity and thrive as a scientist as well. But science communication is not limited to just drawings and fashion. Nowadays, we have so many new types of media to take this to the next level. Another one of my passions is video games. And so I grew up playing video games, and I always loved how they create these fantastical worlds that you can really immerse yourself in. So when I received a small grant for a science outreach project, I decided to try to make my own game. And the idea is that you can explore the inside of the cell and you can solve puzzles that are based on real molecular mechanisms. And I really hope that this game will help people of all ages and all backgrounds appreciate the beauty of science and all of the things that make life possible. And this is actually a super exciting time because we're about to launch it in the coming weeks. So if you're curious to try it, the game is free to play. It's pretty short. So you can go to the website on the bottom of the slide and download it on your phones or tablets, or you can also play it on the browser. And if you do get to try it, I would love to hear what you think. So now I would love to give you some advice. What can you do if you want to explore the world of science and art? This is some advice that I wish I could have given to myself when I was starting out. So I hope it will be helpful to you as well. So next time you work on a research project, maybe try to find a creative way to explain your research, maybe to your peers and to your teachers. And you can do anything you want. You can dress up, you can create a drawing, you can write a story, and see how this helps you explain your science. If your parents or other family members are not scientists, maybe try explaining it to them and see if it makes it more engaging to them and if it makes them more curious to learn more about it. Try to find like-minded people and don't be afraid to reach out to people who inspire you. When I started, I wasn't really using any social media and I thought I'm the only one doing this. But when I started sharing my art online, I realized that the internet is an amazing place for science art. There's a huge field and there's many amazingly creative people. So make sure you check out some of these hashtags to find some inspiration. And overall, I have to say, there's no need to hesitate to ask for advice or support from people who inspire you. Don't be afraid that you might bother them. Most of them will be happy that you reached out to them, but they can only help you if you reach out and ask for it. And try to find opportunities to participate in events and competitions. These opportunities might not be immediately apparent, but they are there if you keep an open mind. And remember, there might be more like-minded people around you than you might expect. I realized this when I organized an art show at a conference in Ensenada, and we left an open wall for students to bring their own art, and we wanted to see what would happen. And the next day, no one could believe the amazing artwork that had filled the wall. People were bringing their drawings, their pictures and sculptures, and these are things that they made at home and never even intended to show to anyone. And it was fascinating to see that, all it took was an open space and people were sharing their creativity, they're being appreciated for their talents and realizing that they are not alone. And I found that incredibly inspiring. And finally, I want to encourage you all to treat your passions like a grand experiment, and it can lead to some exciting adventures and maybe even a new career path. And so this brings us to the end of this session. It's really a pity I couldn't be there in person, but I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new and fascinating. You can find my contact information on the bottom of the slide, so please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or if there's anything I can do to support you. Thank you so much. It's been a really big pleasure, and I hope we can stay in touch. I want to end by sharing the trailer for my video game. It will be officially launching in the next few weeks, but you can already play it. I think it's a really good example of how art and science can work in harmony, and I hope you all enjoy it.